Well, today is September the 8th, 1988. This is Esther. I'm here in Sioux Falls visiting my dear sister Ethel. Being this close won't matter. Now, stop for a minute. No. Unfortunately, Ethel fell and broke her wrist. It was on her right arm, so she was having quite a lot of trouble doing all the things that you have to do in a house. And so first Mary Ethel came to visit and help out, then I came along. So we have decided that we should record a little bit of our reminiscences of long ago. We two woods girls whose home were off and on for the first 20 years of my life anyhow was up in Wansley, South Dakota. Ethel, what can you add to this?
Well, I could begin at your beginning.
Good.
When we lived south of Burke, I believe it was south, near Burke, South Dakota, when our father was teaching a country school out there. And that was, we went out there, I believe it was
1914, since I was born in 13.
We went out to Burke.
Oh, to Burke.
When I was 9 years old.
Oh, to Burke.
So that would have been about 1911. My mother and father both taught school there in Burke. Then the next year, we moved out to this little country school where father was teaching. He had run for county superintendent that year and was busy campaigning as well as teaching school, but he lost in the election to the other man. So in the spring, really it was before spring, in February, Esther was born. The 3rd day of February, 1913. Now, that was when I was about 10 years old. I was to be 10 that year, during the year. And, or was it 11? It was 1913, so I guess I was 11 that year later on. But when she was born, I was 10. So in those days, well, expectant mothers didn't go to the hospital to have their babies, usually. The doctor came to the home. So the night that it was evident that she was going to make her advent, the folks sent my brothers and I, Levius and Leonard, and I to the neighbors. I believe their names were McConnells, to stay overnight. And the next day, we went home. They came to get us, and we had a little baby sister. Well, Mother said, Ethel, wouldn't you like to name this baby your little sister? Well, it sort of frightened me a little bit to think of naming my little sister. But of course, Mother had some suggestions ready. And we talked about the names of Esther and Victoria. And so that's what she was named, Esther Victoria. Well, of course, she was pretty special. She was the first baby we'd had in the house for quite a while. So in the spring, when school was out, and it was out early, in those days the farmers would go through the school year with very little vacation so they could get out early in the spring. So in March, we started to move back to the homestead down on the Whetstone Creek south of Herrick. March the 13th, a neighbor took Mother and Esther and me into Burt to visit some friends right across this, right next door to where we had lived when we lived there. And Father and the two boys, Levius and Leonard, loaded the wagon with household goods and started the move back to the homestead. They took a wagon load of stuff down to the homestead. But unfortunately, the next morning, when we woke up in the morning, I stayed with a girlfriend right across the street from where Mother was staying. When we woke up in the morning, there was a blizzard raging outside. Well, we could barely see, but just as quick as a wink, I got dressed and ran across the street to where Mother was staying. So spent the rest of the time there with her. We stayed several days. And when the storm cleared up and the roads were plowed open, we, I don't remember, I think my father came and we all went down to the homestead then. That's where we got down there in time to, this was March the 13th, 1913. When we went in and the blizzard hit us. We went down to the homestead and were there early enough to plant a little garden and get ready for the spring work. But as the summer went on, my father contracted to teach a school down, and he decided to go out of the county to teach. So he had an opportunity for this teaching position at Viborg, South Dakota, down in the eastern part of the state. So he left in the fall then to go down there to teach. And his plan was to just teach right straight through all vacations. Then he could get home early in the spring. Because Mother had discovered by that time that she was going to have another baby. Well, Father left, and we had a cow that my brother, who was a year and a half older than I, Levius, was to milk. And we had a pig that we were fattening to butcher, and that was part of his responsibility, to feed the pig and the chickens and take care of the horses and whatever outdoor chores we had. Then we settled in for the winter. Do you remember the homestead? Of course you didn't at that time, Esther.
I don't remember it, but I've heard so much about it. I feel like I can remember it. I'm sure I wasn't old enough, but I even have a picture of it in my mind. And And I wanted you to tell about the Christmas and how that Christmas
All right.
when Dad couldn't be there.
Yes. Well, that was quite a winter for Mother and for all of us, with Father gone and away. Of course, we heard from him regularly. In those days, we couldn't pick up a telephone and call somebody long distance. So we depended on the mail to bring the letters, and we would write letters. During the winter, I remember that, I believe it was that year, that we had the whooping cough, we children. And after the whooping cough, I had pneumonia. So I was sick. That is, we didn't have the doctor, but Mother decided it must be pneumonia. And so she made onion poultices. And a neighbor lady friend came and sat up most of the night and kept onion poultices on my chest. Mother had a big iron skillet. She sewed up two bags out of an old flour sack or something, and put onions in, chopped up onions and put inside, and then she laid these sacks of chopped onion, she'd lay them in the skillet and cook them. They get warm, good and warm, then they'd take them out, put it on my chest, put the other sack in to warm up. And this lady kept those on my chest all night, the doctor for the pneumonia.
I never heard that at all.
Yes.
There are always little details that I've not heard.
That must have been a little before Christmas time, because Mother said we were pretty short on money. And I remember when I was getting well, I was lying in bed, and Mother brought this old watch fob of my father's. Men wore their watches in their vest pocket in those days, with a watch fob hanging out. And this had a ribbon on it. Well, the ribbon had worn out, and she had some new ribbon. She says, "Ethel, wouldn't you like to make over this watch fob for your father for his Christmas present?" And she showed me how to do it. And of course I said, yes, I would like to. So I remember of doing that while I was getting over the whooping cough. Then it was Christmas coming up, and we had very little money. Our money was very scarce. And I remember, though, that my grandfather Woods sent us a letter, and Mother opened it up, and there was a $10 bill in it, and she was so happy. And that is, she said, well, now we'll spend this for our Christmas. Well, we'd love to get presents for each other, but we didn't have the money to do it. And I had a suggestion. Of course, in those days, out in the country, 10 miles from town, just a wagon to go to town in and all, we did a lot of our shopping from Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward. And we always had catalogs in the house. And I said, how would it be, we don't have the money to buy it, but how would it be if we cut out a picture of what we'd like to give to each other and hang that on the Christmas tree? Well, Leonard, my younger brother, went along with it. He thought that would be all right. But my older brother thought that was a crazy idea. He didn't want to have any part of it. But anyway, I knew he wanted a bicycle. So we went ahead with it, with the idea, and I remember of cutting out a bicycle, picture of a bicycle, and hanging that on the tree for Levius. I don't know what, that was the only one I remember But I know I hung something on the tree for each person.
You suppose you used popcorn and to decorate, or
Yes, in those days, the common decoration for a Christmas tree was strings of popcorn. We'd popcorn and string the popcorn, and that's what we decorated the tree with. And if we had cranberries, happened to have cranberries, then we'd use cranberries too, red. So we'd have red and white streamers on the tree. We didn't buy Christmas tree decorations then. We made our own. So that was the way it went. For Christmas, we made our own Christmas candy.
Probably had a roast chicken, because you had your own chickens there.
I don't remember about the Christmas dinner at all.
Well, I wouldn't think about the food, you know. I would think about that roast chicken. Sounds so good. We don't do
I
it
suppose,
anymore.
very likely Mother did. I know I really liked, I remember in those days, it was quite a custom to invite somebody in for Sunday dinner. We'd go to Sunday school in the schoolhouse, the country schoolhouse. The Carroll School, we called it, because it was right by Carroll, family called Carroll. And we'd go to Sunday school, have a country Sunday school just on our own, didn't have any minister. And then have a big Sunday, go home and have a big Sunday dinner. And I always liked, was happy when Mother would invite somebody over for Sunday dinner, because I knew what she was going to have. She was going to have chicken and dumplings.
Oh.
Chicken and dumplings, and that was the top of the menu for me.
And now, of course, she did have some canned vegetables from her garden, maybe, if you were lucky enough to have any garden stuff that grew out there in those.
Oh, yes. We always had potatoes, of course. We raised potatoes, and we had in our log house, not log house, rock house.
Yeah.
My father had, we lived, before we came to South Dakota, we lived on a fruit farm down in Arlington, Nebraska. And my father worked for the Marshall nurseries down there. And that part of his work was to travel and sell nursery stock to the homesteaders. So he came up to South Dakota. I was about 4 or 5 years old then, and was in that whetstone country where there were homesteaders. And I remember of Mother getting a letter from him and saying, "Say, what would you think about my taking out, filing on a homestead here in Gregory County?" And we'd come up to live on a homestead. Well, Mother, I can remember, she didn't think much of the idea. But before she could reply, we had another letter from my father saying, "Have filed on a homestead on Whetstone Creek in Gregory County, 10 miles north of Herrick." So Mother, immediately, we had all of this fruit there, lived on a little fruit farm. She got busy and she canned fruit. Well, Mother took her fruit jars and she picked all the fruit as it came in season, all that she could get, and canned the fruit. Then she got some empty barrels, just wooden slat barrels that they used for shipping in those days quite a bit. And she took old newspapers and wrapped the jars of fruit, packed them in the barrels. I don't know how many barrels of fruit she had, but her friend said, "Oh, that will never keep. You can't move fruit like that. After you can it, it has to stay still. And, you know, I'm sure it'll never keep to ship." But Mother did it anyway. She thought there was nothing to lose and might be a lot to gain. because she knew there wouldn't be any fruit there for the family. So we began getting ready. Father came home. I could remember seeing him come, walking up the road. We were about a mile and a half from town, and he walked out. And I was so happy to see him coming. Then they got busy and began packing things, getting ready to move. Of course, we were going to move on the train. In those days, that was the way to travel. So we got our things packed and we moved to South Dakota. I was 5 years old, and I could remember the trip on the train from Arlington, Nebraska to Herrick, South Dakota. Then a neighbor met us with their wagon and took us out to a house that we had rented until we had a house built on the homestead. Then, of course, there was school to think of. The neighbors came in then and helped my father build a rock house. There was lots of rock in the area, flat rock. So he decided to build a rock house. So he dug out a place in the hillside and prepared to set the house, make an open, sort of an open-faced basement for the first floor of the house. And the back of it was set into the hillside and the front all exposed. So they built the rock house. And then they built an upper story, sort of an attic. Those were the sleeping quarters for us children. There were 3 of us at that time. Levius and myself and Leonard. When the house was built and the other requirements for setting up a homestead were met, like plowing up a certain number of acres and building a fence around it. We moved into the house when it was finished. And then I remember my father decided to have some real good chickens. So he sent to New Hampshire for some, what were they called? Black Langshan, purebred black Langshan chickens to start with, some roosters. And they were beautiful. They were black and then many colors in the highlights of different colors, green and purple, and in the feathers, shiny, but black basically. Black Langshan, beautiful chickens, rather large, more for not especially egg producers, but good for meat producers. So we had those. Of course, he had to build a chicken house too. I think he had that built before the chickens came. And then he invested in a team of horses, a cow, at least one cow. I think it was just one cow to begin with. And for milk. And then, of course, a pig to feed. And then I remember he had to plow up a certain number of acres. That was a part of the contract. And my brother Levius and I, he plowed the furrow in the field, and we would each had a little bucket with shelled corn in it, seed corn. And we would follow along behind my father and drop the corn every so often in the furrow. Then the next time he came around, the plow would cover up that furrow, and there would be a new furrow opened up, and we would drop the corn in that furrow. I guess it was about every other time that we planted the furrow. And I remember walking along in that sort of damp furrow, damp soil. We went barefooted when we did that. Felt good on our feet. And planted the corn. And then Esther, have you heard any other stories about that?
I was wondering if you planted a garden right away, or was it too late in the year?
I think probably he plowed up a little patch for a garden.
Was it virgin sod?
Oh yes.
It was all virgin sod.
Definitely. In fact, it was so virgin that he didn't realize the implications of it to begin with. That he had taken out this homestead in the middle of a big cattleman's pasture.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Let's see, what was his name?
So it was very fertile soil.
I can't remember the name right at the moment. But no, not necessarily, just sod. And but the problem was, being in the middle of a pasture, he had to have a good fence around it.
Oh, I see.
To keep the cattle out.
I see.
And that was a problem. Also, we had a problem with coyotes and our new black Langshan chickens. They would come early in the morning. We'd hear the chickens making a fuss and go out, and there'd be, well, in the daytime, the coyotes would come right up.
Do you have a dog?
I don't remember about a dog, whether we had one or not.
It would be no match for the coyotes anyhow, probably.
No, well, we just had to take precautions. Anyway, we had quite a time protecting what we had from the cattle. Tujon, Turgeon. Ben Tujon was the cattleman.
Oh.
They were part Indian people. And he had this big cattle ranch. Real down the creek, a very lovely home.
Oh, a big family?
Not such a big family, no. His children were, when we knew them, were pretty well grown. His youngest daughters were teenager past.
And you weren't old enough for school. Olivia was, I suppose.
Oh yes, we were old. We were old enough. I don't know that
You were 5.
See, when we were first there, we didn't have the house. We had this rented house that belonged to some people who were gone for a while. It was all furnished. They were just away, and we rented it from them and lived there. I remember in that little house, our cook stove was what it was called, I think, a Topsy stove. Just a little, I think about a 2 or 4 burner stove. And the oven was up in the stovepipe, attached onto the stovepipe. It wasn't a part of the stove down below.
Was this partially a heater too?
Sort of a heater too. It did both. It answered for both. But Mother had quite a time learning to bake bread in that oven, that little oven. I don't remember very much about that, but I know that we were glad when we could move into our own house.